Okay, good morning. Boker tov, everybody. Welcome back. Masechet Beitzah, continuing. We are on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet. Yud Gimel Amud Bet, that's where we got up to. We're in the middle of a discussion relating to Trumot and Masrot. We got onto this through somewhat tangentially, but that is the discussion the Gemara is now having regarding Trumot and Masrot. And we saw different cases of where the one would be separating Truma on Yom Tov. Is there such a possibility of that? Okay, we won't repeat all that we discussed there. But then we got into a interesting case whereby the order is somewhat changed. If the Levi comes, right, we've mentioned a number of times the distinction between Achilat Keva and Achilat Arai in terms of related to many things, but related to this idea here of Trumot and Masrot. We spoke about the case where the Levi comes and he takes his, before we've reached the stage of Tevel, before we've essentially reached the stage of Gumar Melacha, of the food being processed, which is then when you would be obligated, you have to begin separating Truma Gdola, Maser Rishon, Trumat Maser, etc. But the Levi comes and he takes his Maser Rishon first, right? We saw how if an individual wants to take sheaves, take stalks from the field, before the Gumar Melacha, and he wants to eat from them, so that's okay, he's allowed to, he wouldn't have to separate anything yet at that point, because it's Achilat Arai. What if the Levi did that? If the Levi came and he took his Maser Rishon in that way, and it's not, but you've not yet done the Gmar Melacha, so there, we said it's not so simple, because he's now taking his Maser Rishon, and it's already called Maser Rishon, even though you've not yet reached the stage of Gmar Melacha, nonetheless, it's called Maser, and therefore you would have to separate Trumat Maser from it. So let's have a look. We're on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet, about, what is it, 8 lines from the top. 8 lines from the top, more or less halfway through. The line says Gufa. Right, this is a statement which the Gemara has already brought, and now we go into a little bit more detail. We said Gufa. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Shem ben Lakish, Maser Rishon shekdimo b'shibulin. So that's the case. Maser Rishon, which goes to the Levi. Levi hikdimo b'shibulin. He didn't wait until the food has all gone and has been processed, but he goes and he takes it already from the field, right? Shmo tovlo letrumat maaser. We say its name makes it tevel for trumat maaser. Essentially, this is maaser rishon, and maaser rishon needs trumat maaser separated from it. Shmo tovlo letrumat maaser. Mai tama. Amarava hoil v'yatsa alav shem maaser, because it's essentially it's already got the name of maaser on it. It says Rashi. הואיל ויצא עליו שם מעשר, ורחמן אמר, ורמותם ממנו מעשר מן המעשר. That's a pasuk, which we'll see in a bit more detail soon. Excuse me. Okay, ורמותם מן המעשר מן המעשר. מי שנקרא מעשר is כקם לתרומתו. From the moment that it's called מעשר, you need to take its truma, it's trumat מעשר. And again, this should not be confused with Truma Gdola, which is a larger amount, which is separated from the whole thing. Okay, so we're now about 10, 12 lines down from the top of the page. There's 2 dots. And then it begins on Yud Gimel Amud Bet, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Maaser Rishon, שהקדימו בשיבולין פטור מתרומה גדולה, שנאמר, והרמותם ממנו תרומת השם, מעשר מן המעשר. Right, so that's exactly what we've just seen. This is Reish Lakish telling us that the Maaser Rishon, right, one will be patur over there from Truma Gdola. Sorry, what we've just discussed is the fact that what we had previously discussed was the fact that you would have to separate Trumot Maaser. But Reish Lakish is telling us, yeah, that you're right. You separate Trumot Maaser, you don't have to separate Truma Gdola. You might have thought as follows. You might have thought the process is, the way it works is I have my crop, I have my tefel. The first thing I have to separate, 2% or whatever it is, I separate the amount of Truma Gdola. After that, I separate Maaser Rishon, and from Maaser Rishon, I separate my Trumat Maaser. So we might have thought as follows. When the Levi comes along and he takes his Maaser, even though I'm not yet required to separate, it's not yet finished the process, the Gmar Melacha, nonetheless, we say that once he is called Maaser, he has to separate the Truma from that, Trumat Maaser. Now, ordinarily, by the time a Levi gets his Maaser Rishon, you've already separated Truma Gdola. So I might have thought that the penalty over here is he's impatient and he can't wait, and he's jumping the queue, right? He's coming along to get his Maaser Rishon. So not only would he have to separate Trumot Maaser from that, which is the 10% of what's left of the 10% of the 10%, which is left after I've separated Truma Gdolah. But since Truma Gdolah hasn't been separated yet, maybe we'll say that we'll impose the Knas that the Levi has to separate both Trumat Maaser and Truma Gdolah from what he's taken. So Rashi says, no, that's not the case. It's only Trumat Maaser, right, the smaller amount. Truma Gdolah, that's going to come later. That's still not that's not his problem. And he says why he proves that it's from the pasuk that says, Trumat Hashem Maaser min Maaser. Maaser min Maaser amati lecha v'lo Truma Gdolah u'Trumat Maaser min Maaser. But the pasuk says you separate Maaser min Maaser. You separate a tenth from your Maaser. That is the Trumat Maaser. Trumat Maaser, as we said, is a tenth of the tenth, and not Truma Gdolah. Right? Lo Trumat v'lo Truma Gdolah u'Trumat Maaser min Maaser. Now, Amar le Rav Papa la Abaye, Yachi afilu ektimo bakri nami. So he says, hang on a second. If you're saying that from the pasuk it is Maaser min Maaser, which comes to teach you that you only separate that amount from your Maaser Rishon and not anymore. So here we've been talking about a case whereby the Levi came and he said Hiktimo b'shibolim, when he came and he took his Maaser Rishon from the field. But what if he takes Maaser Rishon from the house, from the bundles, from the kri? The kri is these bundles of wheat, i.e., once it's already been processed and it's already been smoothed out, and all the wheat is waiting there in the storehouse to be distributed. And before I give Truma Gdolah to the Kohen, the Levi comes along and he takes his Maaser Rishon, right? So maybe I'll say now, the same thing. You've come along and you've taken your Maaser Rishon. Now, in this case, I know definitely, Kal V'chomer, you're going to have to separate your Trumat Maaser. And now, but maybe from the, and I know here the Gemara Melacha has been done, so it's all considered Tevel. But maybe from the fact that the pasuk says Maaser min Maaser means I only have to separate. I don't have to wait. The Levi doesn't have to wait until Truma Gdolah has been separated. He can just eat it, and it's got nothing to do with him because it's Maaser min Maaser. So that's Rav Papa's question. Mikol matnotechem. Yeah, Mikol matnotechem tarimu et kol Trumat Hashem. It says from all of your gifts you have to separate kol Trumat Hashem. Kol Trumat Hashem. I know that's not correct. The Truma Gdolah over there still has to be separated. So now the issue is like this. Hang on a sec. So I have two psukim which teach me. One, I learned from the fact that it says Maaser min Maaser, and one, the fact that it says Kol Trumat Hashem, Mikol Matnotechem. From all of these, even from the Maaser Rishon, I would need to separate the Truma Gdolah. So one pasuk I said tells me a case where the Levi does not have to separate Truma Gdolah, and one says where he does. How do I know which case is which? Malaita, right? Why do you say that in this case it's excluded and in this case it's included? Answer: Ha'idgan v'ha'lo idgan. No, it's only when it's already a dagan, it's already a kri, it's already considered that it's not tevel that we're concerned that you would have to separate the Truma Gdolah. Otherwise not. Okay, now we're at the two dots. Says the Gemara continues. Dan Hatam. We have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah teaches us as follows. This is the Mishnah which appears in Masechet Maasrot. Hamakalef sorin, makalef achat achat vocher. So a person is peeling barley. Right, he wants to get to that which is inside, taking it out of the shells. Makalef sorim, makalef achat achat. So you can do it one at a time. Vocher, and then you can eat. V'im kalaf v'natan letoch yado chayav. But if you had peeled a bunch together, right, and you place it in your hand, so then you would be chayav. So what are we talking about? Chayav, yeah, says Rashi. B'maaser davalei keva. Right. The question is, what, as we've said already many times, what is the difference between achilat arai and achilat keva? If it's achilat arai, it's considered sporadic eating, so then I can just eat, and it's not yet teva. I don't have to separate trumot and masrot. But if it's already achilat keva, fixed, right, like a fixed meal, so then I would have to separate. So let's just see Rashi beforehand, where he says, "Makalef sorim." Says lochlan klufim chayim. You're peeling this barley and you want to eat it raw without cooking it. V'ochel, you can eat. Patur min ha'maaseh, you don't have to separate masrot. T'chiyah gavna achilat arai. This is achilat arai. Ubshelon machukai. This is obviously before they've been processed and been put together in a bundle and smoothed out. You just come and peel them from their stalks. But if you do a bunch together, right, then there you would be chayav. So now, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar, v'chen leShabbat. Just as we have this din when it comes to Ma'asrot, so too we have it when it comes to Shabbat. Now we're going to see there are a number of parallels between Dinei Ma'asrot and Dinei Shabbat in regards to the concept of Melacha. Okay, we say that again. We've said that Trumot and Ma'asrot are only required to be taken once you've performed the Gemar Melacha of that particular food. We know that on Shabbat we also have a concept of melacha, so they're not necessarily interchangeable, the two concepts, but similar ideas. By Masrot, obviously, it's not that we can't perform on Shabbat; we can't perform a melacha. By Masrot, it's not that you can't do it, but it's that when you've done it, that's when it's considered that the food is chayav in Shemot Masrot, right? So essentially, what we said like this is: if you have these barley stalks, barley sheaves in your hand, I don't know what you call it in English, but essentially you peel it one at a time, and you eat the barley from inside. That is considered achilat arai, and that does not need to separate from Masrot. If you do a bunch together and you place it in your hand, so that's more achilat keva, and then you would have to separate. That's for Masrot. So then we say v'chein leShabbat. Same thing applies for Shabbat, i.e., if you peel them one at a time, that's not considered melacha on Shabbat, and therefore you're allowed to eat, you're allowed to do it. If you do a bunch together, that would be considered melacha, and you would not be. What melacha would it be? So it would be, seemingly would be a tolada of the melacha of dash. Right? Dash is the melacha of threshing. It comes from all these melachot, are part of the Sidurat Tapat. When it comes to Shabbat, so we have the first group of melachot in terms of the lechem hapanim, the bread which was made for the Mishkan. So plowing and planting and harvesting and all the way up to cooking. Right, that would be these were the melachot that were involved in that food preparation. Now, unlike we're not talking about Yom Tov, where we have leniencies to allow certain melachot for food. On Shabbat, we don't have the leniency of ochel nefesh, but we do find that in a number of these melachot, borer, sorting, for example, dash, threshing, for example, and these are very, very, very common. These are masim shebachol yom, that a person is eating, or a person wants to peel a fruit or vegetable, or you want to, right, whatever it is. So these melachot come up. It's not that we have a dispensation for ochel nefesh on Shabbat, because we don't. But what we do find, particularly by borer and by dash as well, is that when something is done, what's called derech achila, in the manner of eating, and it's not derech melacha, so then there are leniencies in certain cases. So borer is one which comes up a lot. Borer is the melacha of sorting, separating. So the Gemara in Shabbat tells us there are three conditions under which borer is not considered derech breira, but it's considered derech achila. It's considered the way of eating. And those conditions are, over there, they want us to separate the ochel from the psolet, meaning you have a mixture. You have food and shells, or you have even two different types of food, one you want to eat and one you don't want to eat. So the ochel is what I want, and the psolet is that which I don't want. So I have to separate the ochel from the psolet. I have to separate it either with my hand or with a non-specialized implement, right? Knife, fork, spoon are not considered specialized implements, unlike a sieve or a strainer or something like that. And it has to be done for immediate use, what's called la'altar. Won't get into now what's considered immediate, or does it mean for the next meal? Does it mean what if it's for an hour later? Okay, that is a big discussion there in the Gemara and the Rishonim. But essentially, so that is when it is borer. Right, when it's derech achila. By dash, we find a similar thing, right? We peel vegetables, you take away skin, all sorts of things. What is dash? Dash is when you're threshing the wheat kernels from the chaff, right? First, you're taking them you're separating them, and then afterwards you need to sort them, but you need to remove it from its shell. That is dash. Now again, by dash, when it's done, we find certain ways that when it's done in a way that's done for eating and for immediate eating, or there's no other way to do it. For example, if a person peels an orange, right? So it's brought in the poskim that we would have thought that's whether it's going to be borer or dash or whatever the discussion, but we would have thought that you're separating the peel. But because there's no other way to get into the fruit inside, so therefore it's allowed. That is considered derech achila. So that's something we find by a number of these melachot. And over here, the Gemara is telling us that you have this barley, and if you one at a time, That's not considered the melacha of dash. It's not. That's considered that you're just you're eating. Have a look at Rashi. He says chen Shabbat. He's achat achat. You do it one at a time. Lo have mefarik tolada dash. Sorry, all the time. Yeah, we're talking about around mefarik, which is the tolada of dash. Again, it's separating things which are connected together. The kelacha yadu. The dash kelacha yadu. Sorry, this is not the ordinary way of dash. This is with a shinoi. But if you're going to do them all together, that is going to be you're going to be chayav for that. So that's what the Gemara says, and immediately the Gemara challenges us. Says, "Wait a minute." And we said, "V'chein Shabbat." Say, "Matkif la Rabbi Abba bar Mama." Sorry, I skipped. Before that, we say Amar Rabbi Elazar v'chein Shabbat, and then we say Ini. Right, we're about halfway down the Amud. Amar Rabbi Elazar v'chein Shabbat Ini. Is that really so? V'harav mekalfele devitu kase. Apparently, eating this barley was that was their onyx Shabbat. That was the way they did it. So Rav's wife, Mrs. Rav, would peel for him this barley, but she would make it a kase, meaning large cupfuls, meaning a large amount at a time, not just one at a time. Rabbi Chia mekalfele devitu kase. Also in Rabbi Chia's house, this is how his wife would do it. So clearly, it's not correct, right? We said that by Masrot, if you do a large amount together, then that is considered the Gemar Melacha. But by Shabbat, it's not. By Shabbat, it's mutar. So Ela Yitma Sefer, it's no. So it has to be. That's wrong. Meaning, when we say V'chein Shabbat, we're talking about the Sefer. There was more than one din which was taught over there in that Mishnah. We had the din of Makalef Surin, but then we have another din, which is the Gemara says Hamalel Melilot Shel Chitim Menapeach Al Yad Ve'ochel Ve'im Napach V'natan Etoch Chiko Chayav. Okay, so we had peeling barley. Now we've already discussed this idea before of Molel Melilot, but essentially Molel Melilot means that you have these stalks of wheat and you rub them together in your hand to separate, to remove the kernels from the chaff. So when you rub it together in your hand, that essentially separates it. But now you still have the mixture, you still have the kernels together with the chaff in one's hand, and now you have to separate them. Now that is going to be the malacha of borer. So there we say menapeach al yad, which essentially means you sort of throw it from one hand to the other, and some of the big pieces will fall out, and that is how one sorts it. So menapeach al yad ve'ochel. And that way I can eat. But if you did it in a way not from hand to hand, but Rashi says you put it in your garment. Again, this is a large way of separating. So then you would be chayav. And it is about that. Okay, so again, that would apply to masrot. If you're doing it in small amounts, you don't yet have to separate shumot and masrot. You're doing it in large amounts, you would have to. About that halacha now, we say Amar Rabbi Elazar v'chein Shabbat. That's where he says so too. The same thing for Shabbat. This al yad would be permitted, but more than that would not be. So now Makif le Rav Abba bar Memel v'reisha lemaiser in Shabbat lo. Okay, because essentially what we said is that we had a Mishnah, we had two different dinim. One was Makalef when it comes to Surin, and one was Mola Melilot when it comes to Chitin. So originally we said, when Rabbi Elazar said V'chein Shabbat, he's talking about the Reisha, and then we said no, when he said V'chein Shabbat, he's talking about the Sefer. But what comes out of that is, in the Reisha, we made a distinction between peeling this barley one at a time, which would not be obligate you in Masrot, and doing more, which would obligate you in Masrot. But we said by Shabbat, there's no difference. Both cases would be mutar. In other words, what we're saying is that the Gemar Melacha, the concept, I said before, the concept of Melacha is not interchangeable. But we're saying that what's considered the Gemar Melacha by Masrot is not considered Melacha on Shabbat. So that's the difficulty here. That's what he's that's what he's asking. Matkiv Rabbi Abba bar Memel. V'reisha lemaser in l'Shabbat lo. Right? In the Reisha, we say for Maaser it's considered Gemar Melacha, but for Shabbat it's not considered Melacha, and therefore, what are we saying? Mi'ika midi d'le'inyan Shabbat lo ave Gemar Melacha l'maser ave Gemar Melacha. Says, is it really true? Is it possible that you can have something which is not considered a Melacha, not considered Gemar Melacha by Shabbat, but by maaser it is. So that is the challenge, right? If it's melacha, it's melacha. If it's a melacha, it's a melacha, and it should be for both Shabbat and for Masrot. That is Rav Abba bar Mema. Now the Gemara says no. We do find cases like that. Matkiv Rav Sheshet Brei Rav Edi, velo. He says, what's the problem? Of course, we have cases like that. V'ha garnan lemaaser ditnan. Ezu garnan lemaaser. Right? What is going to make it be considered goren for maaser? What is the gemar melacha? Right? By different foods, it's going to be a different stage. But where it's considered the gemar melacha, and it's now obligated in masrot. So, for example, the Mishnah says, "Ezu garnan lemaaser kishuin vadluin." Right? The different types of vegetables. Mishi paksu v'shelo piksu mishi amid arema. So it's when they have. Rashi explains. Says Mishnah Netel Pikas Shalahen Vukamin Perach Barashol. There's a certain flour at the top of the fruit. And when it dries and the flour falls off, that is now considered the time of Gemar Melacha. Or alternatively, is when you pile them up, right? Misha Midarema. When they're all piled together, that is considered. So too regarding onions, Misha Midarema. When you pile them up together, that is considered the Gemar Melacha of the onions, and now you need to separate Trumot and Masrot. However, when it comes to Shabbat, you just got to pile them up. That's not a Melacha. So therefore, we see there is a difference. There is a difference in the Melacha between Shabbat and Maaser. And now answers the Gemara, it says, I'll tell you why. What do you have to say? Melechet machshevet asrat Torah. Hachanami melechet machshevet asrat Torah. When it comes to, if we define melacha, and by the way, the word melacha we have in a number, many different contexts. It comes up. It's not just by Shabbat. Most common is where we're not allowed to perform melacha. But we know there is. It's brought down. There's certain melacha which you cannot do on Shabbat. You can't do melacha on Yom Tov. You can't do certain categories of melacha which you can't do on Chol HaMoed. There's certain categories of melacha which you can't do on it's brought down, for example, on Erev Yom Tov, on Erev Pesach. Right? Clearly, when we talk about doing melacha on Erev Pesach, we're not talking about the same as Lamatei melachot on Shabbat. So just in terms of that, there are different categories that are brought. But of course, you have melacha in terms of masrot. And again, if we understand melacha as being a form of work, a significant form of work, why should it be different? And the answer is it's different because by Shabbat there's another condition. Shabbat it has to be melechet machshevet. Okay, this is a term we find many times in the Gemara. The Gemara never really gives us a clear definition in one place what exactly is melechet machshevet. But there are different things that come into it. Machshevet essentially means that it's thought out, that it's considered, right, that it's planned in a certain way. Over here, it seems to be more that it's in the sense of melechet machshevet, meaning melechet omanut, meaning a sort of professional type of work. Says Rashi. He says, "Elamayit lach 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Af al gav de la maaser. Melacha. Even though regarding Maaser, this is considered a Melacha. The Shabbat, there's a slight change of gears over here on the Bach, but he says, Le Shabbat lo have Melacha. He adds in the words there, lo have Melacha. He says, when it comes to Shabbat, this is not considered Melacha, because by Shabbat, what do we need? Right? The Melechet Machshevet. He's in Melechet Machshevet, which is, she Melechet Omanut, which is again a sort of a professional, that is what Shasrat Torah. Shenismacha Parashat Shabbat Limlechet HaMishkan. This is learned out from the juxtaposition of Shabbat to Melechet HaMishkan, and just in the Mishkan it was all Melechet Umanut, it had to be Melechet Machshevet. Right, and that's exactly what it says. B'vayakel v'ata Melechet Machshevet K'tiva. And that is why sometimes, even though something is considered the Gemar Melacha, for Shabbat we have a higher standard. Okay, as I say, there is a great deal of discussion in terms of what exactly melechet machshevet means. It can be lechumra, and sometimes it could be lekula as well. I'll just mention one of the places where this comes up, and this is very, very common, again, Ma'asim B'chol Yom, is nowadays all the big questions in Hilchot Shabbat. You think about technology and artificial intelligence, etc., without even getting there, but smart homes and sensors and all sorts of things. There's been a big, big controversy over the last 20 years or so. But one of the conditions that's brought is, generally speaking, we say we need melechet machshevet. So if a person is, for example, just walking, right, and I'm just walking and that causes a light to go on, it's very, very difficult to say that is melechet machshevet. I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I wasn't thinking about where I was going. I'm just walking the street and I walk past a sensor that turns on the light outside. That is the famous tshuva of the Shevet HaLevi, who says that is completely, completely permissible. Once it's inside your own home and you have interest in the lights, etc., then things start to get a bit more complicated. And again, other cases of sensors, etc. There was somebody a number of years ago wrote an article, wanted to suggest that any time that I have an electric sensor, that it would be mutar. Okay, I'll say immediately, this is not the accepted opinion. But you walk by an electronic door, so you could say, "Oh, well, it's not melechet machshevet, but I'm just walking. I'm just walking. What's the big deal?" So the poskim answered that by saying, "No, there is a big deal, because the fact is that there you're walking, but you have part of your intent is that you intend that your walking should cause the door to open." Right? If you were walking towards an electronic door and it didn't open, what would happen? You'd smash into the door. Or more likely, you would notice. Nowadays, most people wouldn't notice because they've got their head down in their cell phone and they wouldn't know, and they would just walk into the door. But assuming that you had your head up and you were looking, so you walk towards the door where there's a sensor, hospital, wherever it is, and the door doesn't open, what would most people do? They'd stand there in front of the door acting like a monkey. They go, bah, 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 whatever it is, they'd wave their hands and etc. So therefore, we see that there's much more room to say that not just walking, you're trying to open the door as well. Anyway, all of that is a derivative of this discussion of melechet machshevet. But the point is, that because this is a special category of melechet machshevet that comes by Shabbat, and that's not necessarily going to be the same as as when it comes to masrot. Okay, so we got up to the 2 dots, 5 lines from the bottom. We'll continue with that tomorrow, and B'ezrat Hashem we'll get into the next Mishnah as well. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Shkoyach.
Shkoyach. Thank you.
Shkoyach.
Thank you. Bye-bye.